Hey, welcome everybody. My name is Robert Scott Bell, and if you're here, you want to be here. We've got an incredible subject to discuss this evening with my friend Stanford Graham from Cardio Miracle and more. And of course, if you don't know me, I'm Robert Scott Bell, host of the Robert Scott Bell Show. I'm a homeopathic doctor and been investigating a lot of things related to health and healing for over 30 years now, broadcast media almost 23. And tonight, what we want to do is do a deeper dive into one aspect, a very important aspect, as we ask the question, what is the problem, right? What is the real issue? And then, of course, from there, we can make assessments, rational, logical, critically thought out assessments as to how to navigate what we've learned and how to be better for it, how to counteract it. You know, whether there be a health challenge associated with the news cycle of the last year and a half to 2 years or other issues. Once we understand what's really happening, then we can uncover how to navigate out of this mess. And we're talking about it tonight of ultimately in a physiological way, right? The impact on the human anatomy and even animal anatomy as you discuss a subject that we haven't even done a lot of discussion on my show, but this is an opportunity to do it with Stanford. And it's about chimeras. And I'm not going to go into detail on this, except to say it's pretty scary stuff. And what's even scarier is that apparently the courts are issuing patents to man making life forms that God had never intended. It's a bit arrogant in my humble opinion, but that may be the least of the considerations when you start doing that, when you start playing God at this level, and the impact on diseases, the seriousness of them, the expansion and reach of them. Are these man-made situations that we're dealing with now? And if so, again, what are the effects and how do we navigate our way out of it? And in every webinar we've done thus far, we've always ended with the option, the solution that we have, and it will be a logical trip to get there. And you'll understand more about why we do what we do, why I do what I do. And just as a quick aside, why I take the nitric oxide supporting production values that I get and realities from the Cardio Miracle product. So Stanford, welcome tonight. I just wanted to set the stage for a little different topic and subject, but it'll get us where we need to go.
Yeah. There's a common expression, perhaps, you, of course, and many of the audience will be familiar with the expression of all roads lead to Rome. And I don't know if that's always true. It's only relevant if you want to go to Rome, or relevant if you don't want to go to Rome. But in this case, yeah, we're going to have a different conversation that leads us to a common, a desirable endpoint. I heard an expression today during a podcast that if we don't control what we can do with our bodies, then we don't own our bodies. And unfortunately, that's in the crosshairs. That subject matter is in the crosshairs of civil society today. Government intervention in civil society, big pharma, big food. It's all about ownership, and the Western Front, so we say, metaphorically speaking, of this particular war is our bodies.
Yeah, Stanford, I know you're a lawyer. You know this better than me, but all what we say, property or all rights, I shall say, stem from property, interestingly enough. And if you lose control of your property, you lose your rights. And what does that mean? If somebody claims ownership over you, and if that sounds strange, consider the attempts through genetic engineering of patenting new life forms. Or what if those new life forms somehow intertwine into your body? The question becomes a legal one, but an important one. Does then the patent holder of that original technology that got infused into your body, either through your ignorance or through some kind of force or mandate, do they then claim dominion over you and ownership of you by that patent, by legal processes? And Stanford, I don't think I'm thinking too much here. I'm maybe not thinking enough about the implications of this chimeric technology, and that we're going to talk about again, how it leads to a lot of what is manifesting as far as control over humans all over the planet.
Yeah, let's put up a couple of let's start the conversation about these chimeras. We can start with a description about what they are, where that term comes from, and why we're using that as a term of art and a common colloquial conversation. Buck, would you give us slide 2? So, so Robert, you know this about me. I received one of my undergraduate degrees was in philosophy, and of course that entailed a lot of study of Greek history and Greek mythology, because of course Western philosophy came out of Greece, Aristotle, Plato, and some other heavy hitters, upon which still so much of our way of thinking, so much of our worldview turns on that hinge. And it really is the distinction between Western thought and Eastern thought. All of our thought processes are really Occidental, originating out of the West, and by contrast, east of Greece, we have the Oriental thinking, right? The thought out of the Orient. That's very different than our Western thinking. But out of the ancient Greek mythology and literature comes one of the most feared monsters of those stories, which was the Chimera. The Chimera was this fire-breathing animal that was a composite of multiple animals, as designated by this bronze on the top side. You see some pottery and other drawings, a 16th century drawing here. But the representation of this chimera was it had specifically a female body. In other depictions, it has enlarged breasts that you would find on a female lion's body. Strangely, it had the ragged mane of a male lion. So you have this bizarre male-female composite in a single organism, then with the head of a goat, specifically a he-goat, growing out of from between the shoulder blades of this lion, and then its tail was morphed from a tail into a serpent. The head, or the tip of the tail, morphed into the head of the serpent, a poisonous reptile. In the history of this, or the behavior of this monster was irrational. It would lay waste to farms, villages, cities without any compunction, without any kind of thinking. It was simply arbitrary, and even to put it mildly, capricious.
No morals, no ethics, no conscience.
Right.
Which,
no conscience.
Which what I would argue is what is going into the desire of certain arrogant men to cross, not breed. We're talking about engineer.
Yeah.
Multiple species onto one another.
Yeah, so, but can we get to the next slide? Then from this to modern day, this word chimera and chimeric are terms of art that are actually used in the patent records. In association, it was Dr. David Martin that discovered this, or at least made me aware of it, that these terms were being used in the patent applications and patent awards associated with the development of coronaviruses, where we do have coronaviruses that occur in nature, largely in the male animal kingdom, but in the patent records, what we see scientists are trying to do is, because the coronaviruses are malleable, they're creating chimeric viruses with coronaviruses, kind of like a Shelley Frankenstein, right? If you've read Shelley's story, Frankenstein, then you get a sense of what this is. Other than, it's even more bizarre, Robert, because at least Frankenstein was made of human parts. It was a human made of human parts, but not a human made of animal in human parts.
If you go to the next slide, you'll see, in fact, that the question is, are we looking at chimeric science, if I call it scientific, but amoral investigation into combining these things? There's a visual, I'm sorry, on slide 4, guys, just to consider that this was made, not found. And I don't know if it's arguable or debatable much anymore, Stan, but tie the chimeric experimentation into what we're seeing here.
Well, so the challenges, I think there's been enough conversation in the public discourse, the degree to which we have it now, of the term gain of function. The gain of function term fits right into what we're talking about in terms of creating forms of life that do not occur in nature. So that would be, for instance, a coronavirus that originates in a camel or a civet or a bat, which there are coronaviruses in these different animals, and then modifying that virus, taking what's described in the literature as the backbone or the spine of that virus, and then adding to that spine a goat head, some other type of some other genes. And in this case, we're talking about digitally created chimeras. We're not creating these, for example, with the genes or stem cells of humans. I mean, that's being done as well. But in this particular case, one of the things that's so disturbing is, even to this day, no one has produced a complete gene sequence of this alleged virus. No one's produced it. There are a lot of different universities that have requested it. The CDC, they have not produced it. And so just in a paper I was reading just a few days ago, where Peter Daszak, who is the president of Eco Alliance, which is funded by the NIAID to Robert defined the origins of the SARS epidemic, the 2002-2003 SARS mini epidemic, the one that never happened. From that study, he stated that there were over 80,000 types of viruses in just in this strain, and that there are there are millions of viruses. We're swimming in viruses, and part of that conversation in which Daszak was involved was, how do we solve for all these? How do we protect everybody against all these viruses, as if they're a threat?
Yes, because if they were indeed, there was no explanation for our very lives right now being surrounded in a sea and filled with a virome in addition to a microbiome, and the virome apparently dwarfs the microbiome.
Right.
So if it were all about hurting us, killing us, diseasing us, there would be no explanation for life itself. I know I've been on there a long time, and I remember in 2002, 2003, particularly covering the so-called SARS coronavirus outbreak. Started in the Amoy Gardens apartment in Hong Kong. I mean,
Right.
I followed that whole lineage, and
Right.
they had leaking sewage in that apartment. Nobody thought that might be an issue or consideration. Issues in Canada with Dr. Plummer, the WHO main lead doctor there, kept reporting month over month data that all the SARS cases there had no trace of the coronavirus. I mean, so I recognize there's a lot of so-called mysteries or abnormalities or even anomalies about maybe causation. And there's a lot of consideration, a lot of things to consider. And it may not be one thing, but a lot of things. But what we are learning and what we do know, there is something that seems to be almost uniform in its attack, even though it's multiform, right, in terms of engineered together to do certain things. And that's sort of the lineage and the evidence to provide, if we go to forensic evidence of what is it doing, and therefore we can rationally say, here's some things that we all can do and be better for it.
Yeah, very good observation, because on the one hand, we could, there's been a lot of conversation about finding the source, right? Find the source of this virus. Let's have an investigation. That doesn't happen. Let's identify Ralph Barrick as the leader of that effort. The guy who's over at the professor, to speak respectively, over at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, who is actually involved in developing chimeric coronaviruses. and working with the Wuhan lab, funded by the EID. So it's a very strange thing that to have the source of a contagion about which apparently everybody's concerned about be so conspicuously regarded as not important, or to prevent the conversation of that thing. But even if, for example, like to take your point, if we can't identify the source, or the conversation about honestly and transparently identifying the source is not happening, let's look at what's happening in the bodies where this alleged chimera.
Yes.
What's it doing?
Yeah, that's a very important point, because we can argue, we can challenge each other's findings or suppositions, but what we are hard or unable to do is challenge what is actually happening, what is manifesting. So while the debate may rage on about causation, we need to identify what is commonly occurring, and therefore then what we can do to remedy the situation.
Right. And I do think there's not a lot of, strike that, I think. One of the things that I've done over the last several months is, as you're aware, is to read every publication, every published study on forensic autopsies that have been performed globally on COVID patients who have passed as a function of the virus. At least those who say the organizations that identified the deaths as a function of the virus, right? So, in which it's participated. So one of the things I wanted to set out and do was, being very familiar with the patent record, is that Dr. Martin has disclosed about the origination of these things being man-made, in touching on the legality of patenting man-made live things that are man-made versus live things that are not man-made, that just occur in nature. That just maybe a quick bifurcation that we can create for the audience is, when something occurs naturally in nature, when it arises in nature, that thing is not patentable. Okay, everybody, the US Patent Office and patent offices globally have established that it's illegal to patent naturally occurring life. Okay, the differentiation, Robert, that you brought up at the top of our conversation is that, well, what about live things that are not naturally occurring? And if they're patentable and ergo ownable, then where does that lead? So before we get to the forensic evidence on the autopsies, let's talk about that a little bit, because there's a difference, for example, between a hybrid organism and a chimeric organism. And so, just for clarity with the audience tonight, let's see if we can clarify those two things. You want to take the hybrid? What's a hybrid? Your understanding of a hybrid, right? I'll throw out here's a difference. When we talk about a hybrid, is where you take cells from two or more animals, and you play with those so that you have, say for instance, we're making a hybrid of two different animals. Well, you make sure that every cell in that animal has a mixture of those two animals. Whereas in a chimera, you have a complete set of DNA from one animal and a complete set from another animal. And then you both sets of those DNA occur in that animal and then express themselves in the various biological compositions of that animal. So, for example, some of the research that's being done is to plant stem cells in an 8-cell composition of a mouse, right? You get a sperm and egg of mice, and then plant stem cells into the phytoblast of the mouse, so that it grows a human, so that the mouse's brain is composed of human cells instead of mice cells. Okay, so we have a mouse, but it has a brain made of human cells, or it has a kidney made of human cells. We've been doing this to create, for instance, heart valves in pigs that then can be, where the heart valve is created by human cells. And then we use that heart valve that is grown in a pig that is a human heart valve, and we use that as a replacement for somebody who needs for a human that needs a new heart valve, right? So this has been going on for some time. And the question about the rights that you raised, if something's owned by a third party and it happens to be in your body, then doesn't that create an ethical dilemma about what that third party owner can do with the thing that's in your quote unquote sovereign body?
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that is front and center in the legal debate now, Robert, because as we know, there are some things in the jabs that are patented. And the jab itself is right.
Yeah, there is evidence that it is purposefully intertwining in your own genetic code. And so the question of chimerism, or however you say that word at that point, is very real here. And, the precedents that might be set. We know that manufacturers of the technologies of genetic engineering have indeed sued people who innocently were subject to overdrift of their products, and that combined in new ways in their product. We talk about corn, for instance, and then sued those that were recipients of overdrift or genetic drift. And the companies claimed ownership over those crops. So don't think that this is a wild fantasy that it couldn't come true. It's already part of their playbook. And if you're not aware of this, some of you may have already fallen victim to the fear and maybe have gotten a jab. And, there are questions as to what happens now. But I would like to, by this discussion, at least start patterning differently for the future so that this doesn't become something we have to deal with.
Right. Again, one of the other issues that we're dealing with here is that in order to know what's in our body, we have to know what's in the things that we're putting in our body. Right. And that seems like a very basic presumption in conversation. There's a recent court case that's going on now where a number of lawyers who are licensed specifically to argue in front of the vaccine court, which is a specified government judicial entity for anybody that's seeking reparations from injuries sustained as a function of injections with vaccines. Well, that group of lawyers has filed a request with the FDA, sued the FDA really for under FOIA to obtain all records associated with Pfizer's development of their vaccine. And of course, the record is enormous. And the conversations that are going on in that court, perhaps the audience already knows about this, but it was striking. This is less than 2 weeks old, that the court sided with the lawyers who were bringing the case. These documents need to be disclosed, and ordered the FDA to disclose them. The reply of the FDA was, well, that's a big burden to carry. Perhaps if we can agree to release 500 pages a month, then
the initial request
we can comply with that.
The initial request response said that we would release all the documents in 55 years. In the explanation that the judge asked about that from both sides, about the arguments, they came back and said, no, we'd like 75 years to release all of those documents. Now that it took them 2.5 to 3 months to approve it, and they want 55 to 75 years to release the documents upon which they base their approval. Folks, you can't make this stuff up. You're like, why would anybody, other than those that don't know and that just trust authoritarians that are telling them what to do? Obviously, if you're here, you're not of that perspective. You want to know. And I want to know, Stan, because we need to understand what is manifesting in here. Besides the patenting of life scenarios, which is very real and problematic for those that are dealing with or don't have friends or loved ones dealing with the effects, the impacts. we can find some common ground, some common source places to start and what to do about it. And again, that's what a big part of this is. It's not just putting the dilemma out there for everybody to scratch their
Right.
head and be more concerned, but it's to give you options that will take some of that concern away.
Yeah, well, let's exchange concern for power, knowledge and power. So, Buck, let's pull up the Sweden slides. In March of 2020, the first autopsies on patients who had died of COVID occurred, specifically in Sweden. And can you give me I think, Buck, yeah, no, let's see, let's back up a couple of slides. There you go. Thank you. So the conclusion here, there were 9 autopsies, right? So we have one of the leading cardiologists in Sweden who contacts his pathologist and says, let's take a look. So they open the bodies up, and here's one of the statements from their conclusions, that they have tiny clots and dead cells that are littering the capillaries of the lungs. When I read that for the first time, I mean, that verb strikes me, littered. That pulls up an image, right? An image, imagining what the vascular system looks like in these patients where tiny clots and dead cells are littering the capillaries. Understanding that capillaries are remarkably small, I mean, so small that they're not visible to the human eye. And if I find a space so small, and folks, if you can consider this, that the capillaries that we have, one of the reasons that these red blood cells of ours are so flexible, unlike any other organism in the body, is that lots of our capillaries are just big enough to let red blood cells through, and not much else. And so they're very flexible. They can bend and twist and those kinds of things without damaging their in the labor they have to perform in carrying oxygen to every corner of our bodies. But understanding that this is one of the things that they observed initially was dead cells and tiny clots throughout the body, and that the capillaries were actually distended, meaning they were bloated or inflamed, right? Next slide, Buck. So they began to form a hypothesis because they didn't know, they had never seen anything like this before. The illustrations on the right side of the slide here are actual illustrations from the publication, where on the top side you see a healthy capillary underlying an areola, and then the bottom slide you see what happens when this contagion affects what happens to the blood vessel, that capillary, when it is affected by this contagion. So a short statement on their hypothesis, Robert, is stated here that by attacking the endothelial cells, the endothelium is this inner lining of our blood vessels, this infection causes the vessels to leak and the blood to clot, which starts an inflammation conflagration. Okay. Buck, next slide. This is a complete statement of their hypothesis, folks. We'll send this deck to you so you can read it at your leisure. But a couple of highlights I would bring here is that, number one, the first paragraph: white blood cells swarm to the lungs and nitric oxide production plummets. And Robert, maybe you can talk to us about white blood cells. Under what circumstances are they showing up and swarming?
Yeah, when you have an immune challenge internally, the white cells are part of the immune response. You could have B lymphocytes. There are many different types of cells here, but they are coming in to try to take over what's gone on here. Is it an invader? Is it a corruption of cells that were formerly you? Like, again, all of the debris fields. And of course, when you see a debris field that is not cleaned up after a time, it won't take long. There'll be whole colonies of new things growing on those things to help try and break them down. That medicine calls an infection as well. So requires more immune response, more white blood cells, more inflammation, cytokine storming at a certain point where it's out of control. And you see lack of oxygenation, you see lack of nutrient, let's say, delivery. and again, more auto intoxication of the body, not only like locally and site specifically, but eventually systemically. And there are any number of cascades that manifest and occur from this starting point, if you will.
Thank you. Now look at the third paragraph. Damage to the endothelial cells, which is again this interior lining on all of our vasculature.
Mm-hmm.
Damage to those cells exposes this membrane beneath them, a substructure membrane. That exposed membrane in turn triggers uncontrolled clotting.
Hmm.
So this initial immune response that you've talked about is addressing a preliminary stage of damage. The secondary stage of the damage is the exposure of this underlying membrane to the endothelial cells. When that is exposed, then you get this uncontrolled clotting, which is occurring inside the blood vessels where blood travels. So of course, if the endothelium becomes damaged and the underlying membrane becomes damaged, that's where you get these leaky blood vessels. And then the automatic response of the body is to stop the leak.
Yeah.
Right? It's to stop the leak that's happening inside the blood vessel. So let's create a clot in the blood vessel at the location of the damage. Well, so what if the locations of damage number in the hundreds or the thousands or the tens of thousands?
It becomes an everywhere scenario that becomes potentially life-threatening. And even in the first sentence on that slide of the Sweden hypothesis is fascinating because they identified a dramatic loss of nitric oxide production. And if you've been with us previously, and we'll talk about it again, the health of the endothelium, the monocellular lining of the blood vessels at that level is dependent significantly on this nitric oxide. And there's a slide to kind of show you this importance and how much surface area we're talking about.
Yeah, and just folks, hang with us till the end here because we'll come back to this very point. It's fascinating because of where the facts lead from this original hypothesis that the Swedish physicians made. They were hypothesizing on facts that they were seeing, but an unawareness of what was causing them. Kind of what Robert, you and I were talking about. We're not sure what's causing this or even where it came from. Forget about that. What's going on? What's the damage being caused? And can we identify what the target is and perhaps the consequence? And maybe from that, we can back up and find some solution to whatever is going on, right? So yeah, back to your point, this endothelium, let's take a moment just to move through that. The illustration that you see here, folks, the capillaries are this, the word in Latin for hair, like the hair on your head, is capillary. It's also, I'm fluent in Italian, and it happens to be the, well, if you like, Robert, if you eat pasta occasionally, capellini, which is a really tiny,
really fine
spaghetti, really thin spaghetti. It's called capellini. Well, that means tiny hairs, little tiny hair, like we call it angel hair pasta. Well, these are these capillaries. That's where the word for hair, comes from. These angel hair pasta, or this capellini.
Yeah, 100,000 miles of capellini in your body. That's a lot of pasta, but no, we're talking about microvasculature, and we described the damage that is occurring at that level, the cascades that seem to be almost unlimited. Again, we're describing what they're identifying in these autopsies, and we're not going through all of them, but just suffice it to say, this is not just being pulled out of somebody's hat. This is really happening. And if I remember correctly too, why do we need 100,000 miles of it? Because there's no place in the body that is more than 3 nanometers away from one of these beds. And there's a reason for that, because that's where the oxygen delivery actually and transport happens. And then the CO2 gets picked up on the other side. And you can't live very long without this.
Yeah. So, Buck, let's hop to the other side. We can look at the functionality, a couple of slides on exactly what the endothelium does. We can move through that because what it does, folks, is a lot longer list of what it does, what they don't do. The endothelium is really a communication interface between your liquid organ, which is your blood, and everything, all the interstitial tissue on the outside of your blood vessels. So the endothelium has a unique capacity in terms of all the other types of cells in your body. It has a singularly unique capacity to read blood, to read the data of blood. and to therefore allow through the vascular walls proteins, molecules, etc., that it wants to allow through, while at the same time preventing the entrance of other things that it won't allow. It's in some ways, this is similar to the interior lining of your gut that knows very well what is poison and what is not, what to allow inside your gut and what to keep out of it. And so the endothelium acts comparatively like those same kind of functions. So imagine what happens, right? If this is a thought process, and what the patent record discloses is that we have scientists who are trying to figure out how to design a weapon that will damage the endothelium. How do we design a molecule or a life form, even though viruses aren't alive? How do we design something that can damage the endothelium? And of course, once that happens, then blood health is compromised, nutrition delivery is compromised, oxygen delivery is compromised, blood viscosity is compromised. The life is the blood, I mean, and blood is life. We know that expression. So what happens to a human body when you compromise the health of the blood and the ability of the information in the blood to get to the exterior of the blood vessel? It's catastrophic. And that's in part what we've been seeing.
Yeah, there's a systemic alert that your endothelium gives to your rest of your body. So if this damage is occurring, it's a wonder how many are surviving or will survive long term based on this assault and insult. So again, major clue as to what we have to do and what we can do. That's the good news, to counteract this, to outpace the degeneration, inflammation, and damage, to get to regeneration and health and healing.
So Buck, let's hop to the slides. Slide 15. This has to do with the German study. Now, in Hamburg, in one specific region of Germany, in Hamburg, they decided to, again, this was in March of 2020, just about a week after Sweden had begun its work. Here, German officials in Hamburg take 90 bodies, the number of bodies number of people who had died up to that period of time of this new virus, whatever the heck it is. And they open these bodies up and they take a look, and you can see the ages of the people here, ages 52 to 96. I mean, those are probably relevant ages to most people on the webinar here. And the female to male split of 34 to 46. Go ahead, Buck. Let's have the next slide. What they found is that all of these patients, except for 2, had comorbidities. So almost, near 100%, 97% of these folks that had died of this thing had comorbidities, and those that are identified here are specifically listed in descending order of representation in those deaths. So cardiovascular disease was the highest ranked comorbidity in those that had died, and then you can see the descending comorbidities of lung disease, nervous system diseases, kidney, and diabetes. So this is relevant because what it demonstrates, at least hypothetically, right, is that immune systems and biological systems that are strained are more, maybe this isn't, I don't know, maybe it's obvious, right?
But, on the show, Stan, we call this a moment of duh. But we have to be silly sometimes because these are such serious issues. But yeah, what it's showing us is that people that have vulnerabilities in certain systems obviously have become more subject to the most severest of manifestations, including death in these cases. And that's notwithstanding the allopathic iatrogenic causes of death that are greatly contributing long before this COVID scenario was occurring. But yes, comorbidities, and you want to stay out of the hospital. That's become the message of the year, much less the day, month, and everything else. But yeah, these predispose you to more likely manifest the worst and the most potentially life-threatening scenarios. Again, we're not here to scare anybody. This is about data that's coming out to address it and assess it scientifically, try to draw some level of conclusions, and again, some pathways out of this mess.
Yeah, so next slide, Buck. Hey, let's go to the next one. as what we, this was in Switzerland, and this was a unique case study because it involved one individual, a female, and she happened to be 35 years old. And so here we're not dealing with people who are 50 plus and have comorbidity. They're older. Here's a young woman who had these really kind of benign symptoms, gone to the doctor. This is in Switzerland, and then is diagnosed with COVID, and then goes home because she's, go home and be isolated, right? Self-isolate. So she does, and she dies. And they don't find her until 2 days after she's died because, something doesn't smell right. And so they find her dead, confined in her home. And one of the things that they found was, in general ways to speak, the cause of death was extremely severe lung lesions. Next slide, Buck. So some of the language from this study that affected me is this first bullet point here: global injury to the pulmonary gas exchange surfaces. You just mentioned these a few minutes ago, Robert, where we talk about the oxygen carbon dioxide exchange.
Correct. Yes. And then when there's global damage to that, what will you have? Eventually oxygenation, blood oxygenation issues. And that's just, again, another big part of it. And unfortunately, the response has been, and I don't mean that they mean to harm anybody, but it's to turn on a fire hose worth of oxygen into lungs that can't already, no matter how much and how forceful you are, carry that which you're delivering to it. And quite honestly, you're exacerbating the condition by damaging tissue further.
Yeah, it's remarkable that one of the main so-called treatments for COVID patients early on was respirators. I mean, absolute futility. There was no ability in the body in these folks to uptake oxygen.
Yeah, no question as to why. Rather, let's just give them oxygen. And this is the missing link in terms of determining what's really going on and then what to do about it. Again, that's where we are, wanting to find a pathway out.
Yep. So, Buck, let's head over to, slide 22. This is a very interesting conclusion here. Up to this point, we get through all these different studies, we find that this chimeric contagion is damaging the endothelium. Everybody's coming up to the same, all the docs and pathologists are coming to the same conclusion. Here's what we're finding. Here's what we're finding, that the endothelium is being damaged. Next slide, Buck. This particular study that came out in May was of consequence, Robert, because it used a different verb. Instead of just attacking the endothelium, this study came out stating that the infection is targeting the endothelium. So that brings another motivation. That actually brings like motive and purpose into the conversation. This is no longer here's what's happening by default or by evolution or whatever. It's there's a design behind this. Now, this report didn't say there's a design behind this. They just said it's clear that this infection is targeting endothelial cells, causing them to leak. Next slide, Buck. This next study, July of 2020, again out of Europe. What hit me with this is that pictures can say more. A picture, what's the saying? A picture's worth 1,000 words, or maybe more. But what you see here on the left, Robert, is this is a capillary network in pulmonary tissue that's healthy. The right slide, this is a electron, a shot through the technology of electron microscopy, which means that you fill the capillaries with a solid substance, a liquid fluid or a liquid substance that then solidifies, so that then you can capture the structure of the capillaries. Well, this is what the capillary system looks like after it's been ravaged by this contagion. And then, so now we see what happens as a consequence of this. At this point, it's still the virus. It's still the virus that's causing this. Next slide, Buck. So here in August of 2020, this European study comes out with this conclusion that the COVID-19 is an endothelial disease. They just say, look, can we just call a spade a spade? Here's what we're finding. So let's just call this by what we see. The findings in this study, well, actually take a look at the first statement here, Robert. We explore the hypothesis that COVID-19 represents an endothelial disease.
Mm-hmm.
This was the hypothesis from Sweden, in March. And here it is, August, and they're saying, okay, let's get serious about this and explore that hypothesis and see what we can find.
And folks, you'll see nothing and hear little or nothing in the mainstream press about this. Very few, and even the new press, alternative press, have focused here. This is an important, turning point. If you do identify it as they have, as an endothelial disease, once again, on some level, it doesn't matter what it is. What matters is what it all does, And that is what we've clearly identified here without so much as a moment's hesitation. This has become the point where we go, yeah, all right, this we know.
Yeah. And folks, we've included all the citations for these articles on the slides so that for the nerds in the audience, you can go check out the articles. I'm not meaning to laugh at the seriousness of this. I've lived with this for several months, putting these, all the studies are not represented here, but these are some highlights, right? But let's move forward from August. The next slide. So here we jump a little less than a year forward, Robert. And here's what disturbed me. This one, I wanted to publish this because as a lawyer looking for an evidentiary trail of what is happening, right? Where's this trail leading? This April 21 study, here's the conclusion, is that the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein impairs endothelial function. That's the quote. It's not the virus that's causing the damage. In fact, look at the last statement on this slide that came out of the study was, again, to me, was like a right cross, right here in the gills or on the nose, on the chin. It's a knockout statement. The spike protein endothelial damage overrides virus infectivity.
Exactly right. This is where I've concluded, and I focused a lot of my efforts in trying to direct other doctors and scientists, researchers, much less the lay audience, to understand this is what we have to address. This is what we know. We can identify this, and we now know also, good news, we're getting to it, how to remedy the situation. And we don't have to chase a virus. We don't have to kill a virus. We don't have to acknowledge a virus. It doesn't matter. What matters is what's happened and how do we restore integrity, structural integrity. And what follows is, of course, the function that we need to live, to survive, to thrive again.
Yeah. And to that point, Robert, this is the first time where the language about the biological consequences of the damages comes up.
Mm-hmm.
First, the first statement here, the spike protein alone damages vascular endothelial cells by downregulating the ACE2 receptor. The second sentence here, the S protein, the spike protein impaired nitric oxide bioavailability. This is not, for the instructed, this is not brilliant. This is not a brilliant observation. It's a natural consequence observation, because we know that the endothelial cells produce nitric oxide. And that nitric oxide is essential for cardiovascular health. That's the whole Nobel Prize was, that's the threshold, the touchstone of the Nobel Prize in 1998. That the nitric oxide was the foundational health molecule of the cardiovascular system. And it happened by, some kind of biological beatification. It keeps the cardiovascular system healthy, and by God, the cardiovascular system makes it. How wonderful is that? You have the thing that keeps your body healthy is made by the thing that keeps that system healthy in the body.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the only thing worse than not knowing that this is occurring is then you have no idea what to do, right? And
Right.
So we throw remedies at it, and we might see some benefit, but not realizing that we're missing some crucial aspects of what we need to do to restore the base level integrity of the tissue and the base level function that follows. And of course, that base level leads to a higher functioning level of not just surviving, but then thriving again. And, Stan, you've told your story. I've told my story in previous webinars, but you are working on getting the world record in the mile for the over 50 gang, almost over 60 now. And I've been running circles around with a lot of young people in the gym I go to for many months now, winning chow challenge after chow challenge. And because I understand this now, and I also understand what to do, not only to counter it, but just in a from a suboptimal, not a dangerous scenario, to an optimal, to a super optimal function. Again, that's where we want to target you. That's the uplifting, happy part of all of this.
Yeah. Here's the other happy part, is on the right side of the slide. This, again, fascinated me because it's not just about the fact that spike protein damages the endothelial cells. It gets inside the cell. It damages the cell. One of the components of the cell that it damages, the term from this study is that it fractures, is your mitochondria. So obviously endothelial cells have lots of mitochondria, and they're the engine producers in every cell in the body, right? Well, almost every cell in the body. Certain types don't have mitochondria, but here's a shot of what spike protein does to the mitochondria. It fractures it, disables it. So, people talk about, I have, when I got hit by COVID, I had no energy.
Yeah.
Guess
whether
what?
it's current or long, that's energy is a big part of it. And we know what we need to do as well there. So here again, more evidence of not only the culprit perhaps, but more importantly, what is the crime? What has actually happened? And now what do we do?
Well, let's hop over to slide 30. We'll get to a conclusion about, well, what do we do? So this Italian study came out in September, and I was shocked that it was published by The Lancet, because The Lancet is a little bit of a less left-leaning politically publication, although it's one of the largest medical research publications in the world. It has a left bent. Unfortunately, medicine has, is political now. But note the statements here. First of all, this statement: we have demonstrated that the endothelium is the primary target of SARS-CoV-2. Okay, whether it's the SARS or the spike protein, here's the conclusion. And then the second statement, which is ameliorative or ameliorative, L-arginine has been shown to improve endothelial dysfunction. So what this study did, Robert, is these researchers administered L-arginine, which is an amino acid, to COVID patients that had a severe condition, severe COVID patients that were hospitalized. Half of the cohort they gave orally administered L-arginine, the other half they gave a sugar pill. Well, the folks they gave the L-arginine to, they were out of the hospital in 10 days.
Well, we have to ask why that might be. What is it that L-arginine facilitates production of within the body?
Yeah, why would it improve endothelial dysfunction? What's the connection between L-arginine and endothelial dysfunction? Because we know the endothelium is being dysregulated by the virus or the spike protein, one of the two or both, right? So what is it? And what is L-arginine, and what is it? Why is it changing the functionality, improving the functionality of the endothelium? Well, so here are a few of the statements, right? So L-arginine is an amino acid. In the last statement here, endothelial cells use L-arginine to produce nitric oxide.
There you go. Bingo.
Right. So here we make a kind of a circular connection, because at the beginning of the observations, at the beginning of these autopsies, we find out, well, the spike protein or the virus, whatever it is, was damaging the endothelium and decreasing the production of nitric oxide. And so now we come full circle to say, well, gosh, if we restore the health of the endothelial cells, nitric oxide production comes back online.
So what is our strategy? What do we conclude?
So what's the strategy? Next slide, bud. So in this study, they said, look, here's the conclusion. And I think this is I enjoy the conclusion, shall we say, this unifying pathophysiological picture of this raging infection furnishes a framework for a rational treatment strategy. And this comes back to the beginning of our conversation, where the origin just kind of like, who cares what the origin is? It could have been cornflakes, or corn pop. It doesn't matter. What is it doing? And let's look at the bodies and develop a body of evidence to figure out
to
what
reach
the injury
these
is.
conclusions. Yeah. So the next slide shows us that L-arginine is the amino acid endothelial cells need to produce nitric oxide and to restore and maintain their proper function. Again, we've narrowed a path of through all these identifications to find a road, a pathway out that is not mysterious. It's not strewn with thorn bushes that make it worse, but get us really out of us onto a beautiful, pristine path, and a path that anybody can follow.
It's, on that path you talk about, I like the way you frame that, because the body is a wonder, right? And so the discovery that the Italians had made in this study is that here is the key, or a key that we found, that you can give the body so the body can heal itself. Because pumping oxygen into these bodies isn't helping anybody. So it's, so what else can we do? So, to the conclusion that the body heals the body, what fuel do we need to give the body? What resources do we need to give the body so that it can use them naturally to heal itself, which is where the miracle occurs.
Well, now we review for those that have been with us before, but this Nobel Prize winning discovery of nitric oxide back in '98, Nobel Prize, and all that's come from it now gets us to the strategy of what we can do. We don't have to treat any disease. We don't have to target any virus. This is not about that. This is not about a new drug. This is about how we can give the body what it needs nutritionally to do what we know it needs to do based on the injuries that have occurred. These are structure function discussions at this point. So don't let anybody think that we're telling you this is a drug that's going to cure any disease. Yeah, we don't even need to talk in that language. We know specifically, physically what's happened. We know how to counter it so that the body can heal itself.
Yeah, we're going off. There's a question in the Q&A. Lori asks, sorry if I sound dumb here, does endothelial dysfunction affect energy levels if you've had COVID? Well, sure. To the degree that it's damaging your endothelium, it's damaging the mitochondria in your endothelium and likely other cells. Because if your endothelium isn't working, then it doesn't matter what you eat. It doesn't matter how much oxygen you put in your body. If your endothelial cells are not functioning to transfer the data from your blood, nutrition, hydration, oxygen, into the interstitial tissue, say for instance of your liver, or your kidneys, or your lungs, or your heart, or your muscles, all your soft tissues, then what happens? I'll tell you what happens as growing up on a farm. If you don't get water to a root system, plant dies. Pretty easy. And that's what's going on with our bodies, folks. Our cardiovascular system provides the irrigation system to the terra of our
structure.
flesh.
Yeah. And without that structure and structural integrity, you have no function. And so the structure dies, then that which tries to live in it is altered. So there we are. I know we've got a few more slides as we wrap up. I mean, this has been as blown away informative as anything we've done in a new, linear pathway to help understand what we do know and explain again why we do what we do. So it's not just, oh yeah, we thought this would be a good idea one day. It's very specific and very beneficial.
But it's a way, Robert, you always put things so simply and beautifully. It's a way of simplifying the conversation to relevance. Because so much of the conversation that goes around today, or what passes as conversation or dialogue, is filled up with irrelevant data. All data is not equal, and even all good data is not relevant. So one of the things that we wanted to pass on to you folks is the relevance. Measuring data, identifying data that's relevant, and passing that on to you so that you can use it to make better decisions for you. in quoting, what we're doing here, folks, is quoting studies that are published and readily available in the public domain. So we're not making any health claims here or disease claims or structure function claims that, the FDA has issues with. And so we certainly don't want to violate any communication rules that way. But what we're doing here is providing you published data by peer-reviewed research articles that are accurate, and then providing you the citations to those so that you can find those. Each of those articles, folks, I will tell you, have more than 4 dozen citations. They're all supported by ubiquitously by other studies that have cited to them and that they have cited. So they're a great source of information. We'll provide the deck to you in the emails that'll follow up this webinar. So, so one of the things that, as a consequence of this conversation, but can you hop to the Malinsky study? That slide. It was one of the reasons, Robert, that you and I are on this webinar is because there is an L-arginine product that was tested by Professor Malinsky at Ohio University ironically, in like December of 2019. That was published in February of 2020. And the first time I read that, the irony of the timing was lost on me. Because this was the first time that I had gone to speak with John about this product. And John's a friend of mine, been a friend of mine for 2 decades. And he, hey, Stan, we have a study on this nitric oxide supplement product, Cardio Miracle. Read this study. Well, he'll tell a funny story because I got up to his home at about 8 o'clock and I spent the next 6 hours going through this study over and over and over because it was absolutely fascinating. So here's some of the conclusions from this study. This Tadeusz Malinsky, his PhD, world authority on nitric oxide and vitamin D3, concludes the following as he does this study of this Cardio Miracle product. Cardio, which is the reference in this study to Cardio Miracle, cardio instantly stimulated nitric oxide release in the endothelium. Now he's doing an in vitro study, right, Robert? He's doing an in vitro study. So he has human endothelial cells in a petri dish.
Yeah, and it's not the first time he has done something like this. And I remember, the reference to John Hewlett when he's presented him with this product to say, can you please test this? He told him, he said, well, what if I find out it doesn't work? He says, well, I want to know that too. I mean, that was amazing. And so in testing it on this actual tissue, it's something he was very well versed in, perhaps the most advanced in, as far as science on nitric oxide studies in this regard. And that's where he saw, and it instantly stimulated nitric oxide release in the endothelial cells. But not only that, of course, the benefit then is a significant improvement in endothelial function.
Yeah, look at that. Look at that second statement. This is right out of the study. Cardio significantly improves endothelial function. Mm-hmm. Now we can't say, folks, let me be really clear here. This was an in vitro study. So this is human endothelial tissue from multiple places inside human bodies, like the umbilical cord, inside human heart, arteries, capillaries, etc. But the conclusion that was reached is that the Cardio Miracle significantly improves endothelial function. Sounds like reminiscent of that Italian study that L-arginine improves endothelial dysfunction. This is an in vitro study, so it wasn't a clinical study, it wasn't an in vivo study made that involved live humans, right? That's not what this is, and so we're not making representation of that. But here are the findings from an in vitro study, and the total improvement. The last statement here, the total improvement of the nitric oxide, that's what NO stands for, folks, nitric oxide / this represents a ratio, one number of nitric oxide over another number of ONOO, which is peroxynitrite. The total improvement of that ratio of nitric oxide production to peroxynitrite production by cardio is about 50%, a massive improvement. So this just a footnote on this second element, peroxynitrite, folks. This is perhaps the most damaging molecule in the human biological system. Dr. Malinsky told me that personally on a phone call. He says, well, as we were talking about this peroxynitrite, Robert, he said that's the most damaging free radical in the human biological system. it can shred DNA. I mean, it's a bad boy, you know.
Yeah, and the sad thing, of course, under even naturally, certain substances introduced in the body can facilitate a spike in nitric oxide production. Yet there's always a corresponding rise in peroxynitrite, which is something you don't want to have happen.
Right.
So as Malinsky told John Hewlett, you created something and solved something you didn't even know was a problem, which was this issue. How do we facilitate what we want to happen while not simultaneously also increasing something that we don't want to happen? And that's the comprehensive formulation that was unique to this product that was tested, the Cardio Miracle.
Yeah. Well, next slide, Buck. So to use the language from the Italian study, a rational treatment strategy, and there are a lot of great doctors out there that are talking about strategies to address this thing that we're passing through socially that's really turned the world upside down in terms of our social practices, our economic practices, our familial practices in so many different ways. Robert, you know a lot of these wonderful doctors. You can name off a few of them that you've spoken to multiple times on your show.
Yeah, I don't name drop, Stan. I don't name drop. But
okay.
Yes, I mean, many of the people you've been reading about, we've interviewed and discussed these things. And again, part of our strategy over the last year and a half, when this became obvious that it was a problem, is to talk to one another, not just on the radio on my show, but behind the scenes, and share information. And, we're coming to similar conclusions, maybe through different directions. But in terms of what we're revealing here, I think it's one of the most direct, if not the most direct impact from the standpoint of, maintaining structure and, of course, function in a time when we are challenged like no other.
We got a couple of Dr. Debbie Warner in the Q&A section says, will Mr. Graham share the citations in the email? Yes. Dr. Debbie will not only share the citations in the email, we'll include the deck in the email that actually have the citations. So that looks like Robert Jr.
Yeah, my son is popping in saying, what are you guys doing? We've been talking about damage to the endothelium. Very interesting stuff, and how to repair it. So here we are concluding something. I think it becomes somewhat obvious. Those that want to learn more, of course, those citations will be made available. And I love that everybody's interested, or anybody that is interested in digging deep on this, because we're going to help a lot of folks to do better by what they already do as doctors, as physicians, as healers. What can we do to provide some options to move forward?
Yeah, Buck, you've just, Buck's just put in the chat the link to take a look at the offer for a Cardio Miracle that we're making this evening for everybody that's attending. A generous offer is a function of our wonderful relationship with the one and only Robert Scott Bell. So you have the link there, and this is what you'll find. And we'd encourage you to take a look. Take a look at this. Take a look at this. We framed this out in a cost per serving metric, right? So you can take a look at this buy 3 and get a fourth, at $1.37 a serving. Can you find me anything comparable that's worth drinking for $1.37? Even clean water these days requires some interesting technology, unless you're living up where John does, where it only goes through Mother Earth as a filter. But this is the point of putting this knowledge into practice and how to do it efficiently. And so this special offer, again, I appreciate Stan and John Hewlett, of course, for making it available for the folks that are regularly a part, almost like a family to me here on what I do on the Robert Scott Bell Show and beyond, wherever you've heard about this particular event that we've done, because it's as fascinating as any subject that I've covered, and a unique way that it's helping me hone in my understanding of what I need to do to help myself and my family and all those who are on board when we do the show about health, freedom, and healing liberty 6 days a week anyway. So I'm grateful for your research, Stan, because you've brought a lot of this to my attention that if I was studying the way you were studying now, I wouldn't have time to do the show.
to continue to broadcast. So thank you. That helps me to shortcut the way to find, what's going on here and refine what I'm doing to help myself and others.
We're grateful for all you do, Robert, for having that show for 23 years now.
Almost, launch of the 23rd year in January. Yes.
Yeah. And the service that has provided to tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands of people to understand that we live by the grace of God, and these bodies are mechanistically marvelous and beautiful pieces of art, and treating them well is a stewardship.
Well, again, I'm honored to be able to be a conveyor of this information, because it is honoring the very gift of life, this body that provides to us while we are here. And, that you don't get out of life without some level of suffering or pain. I know that. But those that are suffering and pain or afraid of being in such a situation, getting this level of knowledge and incorporating the information into your daily life can make it so that you're not a victim of that which you don't know, but you are a champion because you now know, and you now act on that information and that knowledge. And then you help others with the same, or better as we go. We continue to learn. So I appreciate this very much. And once again, that offer is available. How? Click the link that you put in the chat.
Link. Buck, would you put that link in the chat again? Folks, go there and execute that. Now, I want you to know as well, not making any specific claims to you individually. There's a money back guarantee here. No risk. Try this. See if it works for you. See how you feel, because this is really about that. Listen to your body and how it responds. And we stand behind this 100%. If it doesn't work for you, we'll gladly, refund your money. So we invite you to explore this. We invite you to do the research. We'll have plenty of citations in the email that will follow up with the recording of this webinar, so that you can do your own research. We certainly encourage that. Please don't believe me. Read the research and do your own due diligence. And we certainly want to empower you to do that and give you head you down the path of right reasoning.
Exactly. And we have, again, many stories we could share, but then again, we'd be in trouble if we shared them. It's just a strange world, right? But suffice it to say, I take the Cardio Miracle every morning, sometimes the second time in the day, depending on what I'm dealing with during the day or what's around me. But from again, more of a high level fitness perspective, Stanford and I really try to push our bodies beyond their limits, but hopefully in a healthy way. And I think this provides a way to do it healthily. And I will just say this about a friend who I met at the gym, who maybe about my age, but a little bit more gray hair, and he's a little bit got that belly, and he's working his tushy off, trying to work hard to get in shape. And I watched him in the red. There's this monitor that you wear at this gym, and you could see what level you're in. And he was always in the red zone. It concerned me. It's not good. You want to be yellow as optimal, or even green, but not red so much. And I told him about the Cardio Miracle. He got on it. A week later, I saw him at the gym. I said, "How's it going?" He's like, "Look, I'm in the yellow zone." And it was like flipped, right? He was always in the red with a little yellow. Now it was always in the yellow with a little bit of red in a week's time.
Wow.
So that meant his efficiency of delivering oxygen to the cells under stress was immensely enhanced in that short period of time. So again, that's a lot of my focus, even though we focused a lot on other things tonight. Just wanted to give you some good news in taking it up notches and levels that if you desire to get there, you can.
Yeah, and that one of the things I like to say, because this is the way I see life. Life is a sport, and we're all suited up. Everybody's suited up. Everybody's an athlete, and your performance may be, I want to make it up the stairs without having to stop. I would like to be able to walk a quarter mile without having to stop and take a breath, and rest up. There's a starting place for everybody's health and everybody's, improved health conditions. And so we start where you are, and we're here to support you in that.
Well, I appreciate, Stan, the opportunity to connect with you on this topic. I've been intimidated about covering this just over the years, because there's a lot of complexities, and including, the moral and ethical dilemmas that are not so pleasant. But I think the way you framed it beautifully to carry us through what we're identifying, and then fundamentally even to move beyond it very quickly so that we can get to here are the things that help. Here's what you can do so you don't have to remain in fear or remain a victim, perceived or real, and move forward in strength and in power. And as I say on my show all the time, and it's a reminder for me too, that the power to heal is yours, it's mine, it's ours, and we just got to reclaim it. By doing the things we know that are better and best to do. And so this is all of our journeys, converging to do that. So I appreciate all of the doctors in the audience too, and lay persons. I saw my friend, Dr. Gloria Gilbert, was here. I love her dearly. She's such a sensational healer in her own right and been through a lot, and always a learner, always a consummate. I want to learn more. And that's the mark of a true healer at any level, is someone that's always ready to learn something else and go deeper. And I appreciate everybody for being here because you're doing that. And that's a high order, and not everybody does it. So kudos to all of y'all for being here with us. Anything else, Stan, before we wrap it up?
I'd just say, yeah, you can watch your emails tomorrow, because we'll download the recording of this webinar and we'll load it up for you. And Robert will be forwarding it to you, and we'll be sure to include the Malinsky study citation as well as the citations to all the other studies in this deck. And the deck itself, we do want you to be informed. That's why we're here.
Yep. So thank you all for being here. Appreciate it so much. Take advantage of the offer and share it if you'd like, and bring that power to heal back where it belongs with each and every one of you. Thank you again.
Merry Christmas, Robert.
Merry Christmas, Stan.
Great being with you.